Hey guys, what is going on? It is Alexander Williamson here with the secret history living in your aquarium. I'm here with Fishtory news that you might be able to use, probably not, but it might be interesting. So, welcome. So you may know that Asian carp are an invasive fish, and in fact they have been found in 76 countries, and they've noted that in those countries the populations either invariably escaped or were intentionally released into the wild for a number of reasons. Well, an unusual thing happened in Milwaukee, or just outside of Milwaukee. A wholesaler fish dealer was convicted in Plateville, Wisconsin, of selling invasive Asian carps. And Ping Li, who is the co-owner and sole operator of Lee Fish Farm, was convicted in the misdemeanor case of 17 counts of possession of these fish, and was ordered to pay $13,000 in penalties by the Department of Natural Resources. Now, it's the state's first case involving the illegal sale of big head carp, grass carp, black carp, silver carp that he had. And it's illegal to possess any of these Asian carp in Wisconsin and most states unless the fish have been gutted or the gills are severed. That's the actual law. In South Florida, however, they are legal because the local water management district in the Everglades area has used these carp, even though they've sterilized them, but they've used these carp by letting them go to keep hydrilla, a plant which tends to block up drainage valves and flood valve controls in the Everglades when it rains really hard. So the big head and silver carp, they feed by filtering food through their gills. They eat it through their mouth, and then they filter out the water through their gills and eat the plankton and other little micro fauna and flora that are in the water, which actually means that they clean ponds really well. And that's what they were used for traditionally in China, was to clean out the ponds of algae and pond scum type stuff, duckweed, you name it, they'll eat it. But that also means that they're not picky with what they eat, and they're able to eat just about anything. They're kind of the omnivore pig of the fish world, really, in the freshwater fish. So, you know, the silver carp is one that's caused a lot of concern because of all the close competition it has with other fish. So they were imported into the United States on purpose originally as a food, and then also as sort of a pet here and there, but that was never in high numbers. But they were used in sewage treatment plants and aquaculture facilities throughout the 70s and 80s. However, some of them escaped and then got into the Mississippi River Basin, where they are now firmly established. Now, these Asian carps are a major threat to our native species because they compete for food, living space, they eat the eggs, and because of their filter feeding habits, they are really difficult to capture by normal fishing means where you'd throw out a line and a hook and bait. And so oftentimes you have to net them and other means that are a little bit harder than when you're going for other game fish. Now, beyond this, as you've probably seen videos, there's the flying carp. You know, the silver carp, when they jump, can jump when they're disturbed or scared, and they can jump a good 6-7 feet in the air from the water, and they've known to hit boaters and injure them. And there's one confirmed case of someone actually being killed, knocked out of a boat and killed. There's purportedly a few other cases as well, but one confirmed one that I could find. But in any case, I just wanted to bring this up because it kind of shows that we do have a lot of laws about what you can and can't have in the fish world. And with this new legislation coming up on the Creates Act that is going through right now, made it through the House and is going through the Senate, I just wanted to point out the way we have effectively used existing laws to handle these things. And the fines in this case were not crazy, nor was jail time imposed, but the stipulations are there if the judge wants to use them. The guidelines do allow for up to $250,000 fine and up to 5 years in prison. So it can be a big deal if they want to get you, especially on the federal level with invasive species or any endangered species, makes it even worse. So they got someone in Wisconsin who was selling them at a fish wholesaler. So just wanted to bring that news out. I hope you guys are having a great day, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye, guys. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Secret History Living in Your Aquarium Fishtory edition. So, episode 44, 45, 45. Freshwater aquaculture can cure the world's protein shortage problem? Question mark. All right, so this was an interesting article that I came across, and basically it was analyzing where the world gets its protein sources from, so for food. And freshwater aquaculture dominates the aquaculture production of food, but it's often overlooked by global food policy agendas, research grants, and just studies in general. So this was in the Journal of Nature, and quite a few different people worked on this, including ichthyologists by the last name of Zhang, Ben Belton, Dave Little, Max Troller, just to name a few. But they wanted to argue that recent studies underestimate the production potential for freshwater aquaculture, and that it actually, because of the complexity of marine aquaculture in saltwater conditions, that basically we have done a lot of research about how to keep things at equilibrium and how to keep fish alive in saltwater because it's more complex. But in doing so, we've really neglected the fact that it's really easy and that fish grow much faster, generally speaking, in freshwater, and that they actually have just as high levels of, vitamins and nutrients in many cases. So it's kind of interesting because since the 1980s, aquaculture has been a really big thing around the world, and inland fishing has grown very little. But aquaculture at sea has been rising like crazy, and it's hard to do out in the ocean or in a harbor. But not all aquaculture is equal, and while marine aquaculture has attracted that lion's share of research, funding, policy work, politicians' attention, freshwater aquaculture is actually the heavy lifter. Places in Africa, places in Asia, when it comes to producing fish that are available and affordable to low or middle income people, who are the people who are most in need for this protein source, freshwater fish aquaculture, or the intentional raising of farmed fish, 80% of it is done in the fresh water around the world. And it is dominated by herbivores and omnivores in freshwater species, whereas marine aquaculture kind of uses fish generally that are bigger, faster, and oftentimes carnivorous, so they're more expensive to feed. They feed up higher on the food chart, meaning that they also build up all the toxins that all the other things in the food pyramid or food web have. And because of this too, there's also a bit of they are a charismatic fish, just like a lion or a tiger or a rhino, a tuna or a shark or marlin, things like that, salmon. They're just a bigger fish. They're more impressive to see, and so there's a tendency to use them as mascots and things more than, say, tilapia or catfish. But it turns out that you can raise tilapia in much more extreme conditions, and that a lot of people think that, there is this freshwater crisis with global warming and with how we utilize water so much. But it's really actually, there's too much water in a lot of places, and flooding is going to be another problem just as much as drought is in other places. So if we are to utilize this properly, we should really be funding a lot more studies on how to set up sustainable filtration using low amounts of water in outflow, and things like how to raise fish in extreme climates and where to raise the food in the ponds with them, with natural, plankton or other fish as their food source, or plants. Whereas out in the ocean we can do that too, but it's just dwindling down resources that all those other apex or higher level tertiary consumers and so forth end up eating. So basically this could be the main protein source for the world in the next 20 years. Right now, cattle, chicken, pigs, things like that are still very important, but large-scale inland pond production is projected to be the highest source of protein for humans in the next 20 years. And, the other thing, other than being less expensive and not being as hard on the environment, the other thing about these freshwater things is they can be contained very easily. You can dig a pond and you can isolate it. And as I said, it doesn't bioaccumulate. So when you have, a tuna, it may eat a herring that ate a sardine that ate a shrimp, and each level of the way, those things have been accumulating, say, mercury or something in their bodies. And by the time you get to the body of the tuna, you've got a fish that has a whole lot of liver concentration of those metals, and that gets throughout the whole body oftentimes too, depending on the toxin. So it's something to think about and something to encourage in policy and in projects around the world that are going on, even if it's not sexy or as cool sounding as salmon farming or saving the sharks who are being overexploited for their fins and things. It still is very important, and realistically this is the frontier that needs to be streamlined and made most effective for the people who need it the most. So do your part as the years progress here and advocate for aquaculture of freshwater species. It seems to be much more promising. So I'll talk to you guys later. I'd love to know what you guys think about this, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye. What's going on, guys? It's Alexander Williamson here with The Secret History Living in Your Aquarium. We are on episode 44 of Fishtory, or on the Aquatic Morning Show shared, or for my members for $1.99 a month. You guys get a daily story of something going on in the fish world. So what is it that I have for you today? Well, it turns out that it's this: marine biota and the psychological well-being of Homo sapiens as a preliminary examination of dose-time response effects in an aquarium setting. What does that mean? Well, turns out that humans like fish tanks, so exposure to natural environments can have a calming and stress-reducing effect on humans, obviously. So moreover, previous studies, and lots have been done, suggest that there are even more benefits than just stress reduction, and that the areas with higher species richness actually have a higher advantage in what it does for your health. So basically they did a natural experiment to examine people's behaviors in different settings and situations, psychological, physiological, and their reactions, increased levels of diversity in marine biology actually exhibited different outcomes in how people responded. So first of all, they put a tank in with just plants or decor or coral, and they took down the effects of that. Then they had a partially stocked tank with only 3 or 4 species in like a 100-gallon tank, and then they put in a tank with like 15 species and a schooling species and maybe like an eel. And so they did this study, freshwater, saltwater, and they did it a bunch of times. This study's been reproduced many times. So the new study is that people went back and took all the studies that have been done and basically put them together as one big article and proof, which the link is in the description in the community tab or on my channel for viewers that are members. But basically you can go there and look at all the graphs of how much it lowers blood pressure, how much it reduces cortisol levels, and they found that it is linear, and that basically if you have a lowly stocked tank with not that many plants or not much coral and whatnot, it helps a little. The water, it's about as good as a fountain. But if you have more, it helps more. And if you have, a fully functioning ecosystem, it's actually better than, the other two and then some. Like it is the best of all. And they also found that synthetic decor, so the little plastic divers, for instance, those didn't elicit as much of the cortisol and calming effects as, say, biotope or aquariums that are set up like the natural habitat. And also, it's been noted by biologists that the fish don't respond the same way when they're not set up in a biotope. So if you are worried about your health a little bit, you may want to set up an aquarium that's a biotope. They also found that the longer you stayed engaged staring at a tank, the greater reduction in heart rate, the greater increase in self-reported mood elevation, the higher interest in not just the fish but in conversations and the world around us, and the higher the levels of anti-stress producing compounds in the body and lower cortisol levels. So it's really kind of another brick in the wall, so to speak, another feather in the cap of our hobby, which you all already knew, but that fish are good for our health, and keeping them is not just a hobby necessarily. It actually has been shown, even people who say they don't like fish, that aren't interested in fish, they don't keep fish, it's been shown that it helps. And same with plants, that it helps. In a vast majority of people, being surrounded by nature is just a calming thing for humans. After all, it's only been maybe 3,000 or 4,000 years really that we lived the majority of our life in a building or in a city or town even. So we've spent maybe several million years coming to be humans, and probably 500,000 years as pretty modern humans, mentally and physiologically, and we lived in nature. So the last thing I wanted to mention about this study that I thought was pretty interesting was that they also mentioned that there was a correlation that if you have more tanks, they actually got higher dopamine and serotonin responses. So that's to say that multiple tank syndrome is real. And just like drugs or gambling or let's say romantic encounters, the more you have of it, the more you want of it, and also the better the hit of dopamine, adrenaline, oxytocin even, which is a chemical that's produced when mothers give birth and when they nurse their babies. Also MDMA, the chemical ecstasy, produces this as well. Well, we get a little hit of that naturally just by spending time with our fish tanks. So it kind of makes sense how some people definitely get hooked and end up with 20 or 30 tanks. All right, guys. Well, thanks for tuning in. I'm going to hand it back over to Jess at the Aquatic Morning Show, but I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll talk to you later. Hey guys, what's going on? It's Alexander Williamson here with the final edition for this week, episode 46 of Fishtory. How blind cavefish survive in almost zero dissolved O2 or oxygen in their caves. So researchers at the University of Cincinnati have been studying these incredible little fish. And something else that's incredible, other than the fact that they don't have eyes and that they're pink and that they live in these caves, is that the caves have extremely low oxygen that would kill almost any other fish known to science. So the biologist at the University of Cincinnati College of the Arts and Sciences found that the Mexican cavefish actually produces more hemoglobin through red blood cells that are much, much larger compared to those of surface-dwelling fish. So hemoglobin helps the body transport oxygen into the tissues and carbon dioxide out of the tissues between the cells and organs and through the fish's gills, and then off gases. The study was published in the Journal of Nature, and that's a good one. And the scientific report demonstrates how much there is to learn about these animals that we've been studying for 200 years. The blind cave fish we've been studying. We've studied them, the tetra, because it is a species which is found in the rivers, and it's a silver tetra with eyes, and it's quick moving, and it lives in high oxygenation in Mexico. And then yet in caves right nearby, it's been sealed off for at least 200,000 years, and it's evolved into a completely different looking fish with no eyes, with different senses. It's actually not even a symmetrical fish. It's got all sorts of different adaptations with its organs and that we know about, and its lack of pigment, for instance, and its rates of cancer, its ability to digest different foods and things. And yet they've remained so close genetically that they appear to be the same species, and they in fact are the same species. They are able to breed with the non-cave versions of themselves, which is pretty cool, because you'd think if they'd changed that much that they'd probably be a different species by now. So these deep water caverns have standing water that lies undisturbed for thousands of years. It percolates down through the rocks, and it's very still. And some of them have almost no dissolved oxygen in them because of that. The only oxygen they do have is from the decomposing matter that kind of floats in there once in a while. So they move around all the time, but they have very little access to nutrition and almost no access to oxygen in their environment. So it's been this paradox that scientists have been trying to figure out. How are these fish able to metabolize things and move? So blood samples revealed that the cave fish have more hemoglobin than the surface living fish in the creeks nearby. So the Cincinnati University researchers assumed that cave fish must have a higher hematocrit, a clinical measurement of the relative contribution of red blood cells in all their blood put together. And the research expected to find more red blood cells in the cave fish because of this, because they're needed to carry more oxygen proportionally. But it turns out they were exactly the same in number. But when they looked at the cells underneath a microscope, they figured out what the deal was. The cells are much bigger, 3 or 4 times larger in size. And because of that, the surface area on those cells is able to hold on to a whole lot more oxygen and carbon dioxide to get rid of the carbon dioxide and to get rid of the oxygen. And it's a closed loop down there, basically. So we know very little about the mechanism of how this evolution went in their bodies. And there could be a lot to gain of the insight of how hemoglobin and blood cell size can contribute to energy. So a scientist by the name of Ryan Gross said that elevated hemoglobin might allow cave fish to forage longer, without taking a breath essentially, or using the oxygen equivalent of a breath in the environment. Cave fish have often they often have to work way harder to find their food in these caves, and they're blind, and so it's really puzzled people. They found that the fish's skull is also asymmetrical, like I mentioned earlier, which looks to be an adaptation to navigate a world with no visual clues. They kind of have a tilted head because of the way it helps them sense things, I think. And they've identified the gene responsible for the fish's color. And it's the same gene that is responsible for red hair and fair skin in humans. Kind of weird, kind of interesting. So it's a gene that goes way back to fish that we share and is relevant. Pretty odd. So again, they think that they could have diverged as long ago as 250,000 years ago, but this new study says that the gene mutation probably occurred more like 20,000 years ago. and that the surface fish found nearby in streams of Sierra de El Abra, Rio de Albra, is where they're studying these fish. And now they have a lot of different questions they want to know. But one last little interesting tidbit when I was reading about all this is that humans actually also have this occur. And it turns out that certain African populations, as well as Aboriginal and some Indian from the subcontinent of India and country of India, have evolved the similar gene where their hemoglobin can hold on to more oxygen. In fact, people actually oxygenate their blood and infuse it, and that's what blood doping is. That's what Lance Armstrong got in trouble for. Well, it turns out there is a natural gene from people found in very, very hot places that allows them to more effectively use oxygen in their blood, which is, I don't know, I think it's pretty exciting. And even more cool is that they studied the people of the Andean mountains and the Tibetan mountains, and they found that this gene is like off the charts expressed. And so they actually have the ability to breathe far less oxygen because it's far more efficient the way their hemoglobin is in their blood. Now, in humans, oftentimes we produce more blood cells. That's our body's response when the more red blood cells when we go into high altitude with low oxygen and things. But over time, those people in those regions that have lived there for millennia, they've actually developed the ability to have larger of those cells. And so while you look at a patient that's not from a mountainous area above 12,000 feet ancestrally, they would get all these red blood cells being made in their body, which takes lots of energy and things too to happen just to breathe, and they'd be struggling. And people do struggle. If you've ever seen people climbing mountains, they struggle up there. However, a lot of the people that live in these high altitude ranges, they actually, when they take them up even a little bit higher and whatnot, they don't see necessarily that they're making more red blood cells. They actually have large enough blood cells that it can supersaturate on it, and they can function that way. So it's just another little tidbit that if the genes for skin and pigmentation and hair, or basically keratin and carotenoids in the keratin being expressed in hair, if that's shared like 350, 400 million years ago by a shared ancestor of fish, and we've both held on to that gene, it's interesting to think what gene could be in there in humans in the blood. Is there something that we could turn on and off genetically to treat things like when someone's struggling with lung cancer and they can't get enough oxygen, or anything where they're lacking oxygen? Pretty interesting stuff, and it's why it's important to save these oddball, one-of-a-kind treasure trove spots where there's just one cave or one sinkhole with a species that, maybe there's not many of. And people say, oh, well, who cares if it goes extinct? Well, we learn really incredible things, and that's why preservation of nature, just another reason why it's so important. So thanks again for joining me. And again, if you want more in-depth info on all these stories, it's only $1.99. It's only ever going to be $1.99. Or if they go to $1, I'll drop it to $1. But as cheap as I can make it for folks, and that supports the channel and my research. So thank you so much for your time, and I will talk to you later. Jess, I hope you have a great day, and everyone at the morning show and in chat, I hope you're doing well, and I will talk to you next week. Bye.